Actually, I think I can.
I did it.
You did it. All right. Okay, then.
Shocking.
All right. I know when either of us does anything technical, it's always shocking. All right. Have a good class. You did it. Good night.
Hi, Harriet. Hi, Josie. Let me give hellos to everybody.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Hi.
I'm gonna.
I loved class last week. It stayed with me. It was great.
Yay.
Rabbi, what was the name of that book about the guy that was in college who was a like neo-Nazi who started having Shabbat dinners?
Oh, hang on. I'm gonna go get it.
Okay.
Just want to check, is my microphone working? Are people hearing me?
Yes.
The book is called Rising Out of Hatred by Eli Saslow.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Hi, we hear you, Sonny.
Okay, good. This extra
Thank
plug-in
you.
microphone, never know if it works right.
You're good. Hi, Judy.
So I just finished Just Mercy, which was pretty amazing.
I think Just Mercy is a really important book. There's Grace. And the Friedmans. Hello, Bill Knack. Hi, Lisa. Susan, did I say hello to you?
You didn't, but you did now. Hello.
Hello. And hello to your family.
Thank you.
Hi, Robin. Cheryl. I think I. Okay, those are. Hello, Sandra and Ed. And Yohanan Poole and Olga.
Okay, we're unmuted now, but I think you'd probably like us muted.
Well, you know, we can, as we're saying hello, it's okay to be unmuted.
Okay, you'll let us know.
I'll actually mute you.
Oh, okay.
Power.
It is power. It is power.
You're one of
There have been people I've been wanting to mute.
I can imagine.
You have to be careful what I say.
We all know the feeling.
Yochanan, you're a person who would never say such a thing.
We're all entitled to our feelings. How we act on them is another matter.
Thank you. Oh, I love watching everybody coming in.
No.
We just came from Hebrew class.
Excellent.
Fantastic, by the way. Anybody who wants to learn Hebrew, John Poole, Yohanan.
Thank you. Thank you for
Yay.
the call out.
And a couple of us just came from the adult bar bat mitzvah class. So we're, it's the day of much learning.
Yes.
Good.
My cup runneth over.
My cup runneth over.
I saw a very interesting article on the Shalom Hartman website reflecting on just how, like, the number of people attending Jewish education under the current Zoom conditions has like multiplied tenfold or 100-fold.
Yeah.
It is just incredible.
It is
Yeah.
so convenient.
They had almost 7,000 people studying together.
Oh my gosh.
Is that really something?
Amazing.
Well, it was
Okay,
excellent.
let's say our blessing for studying. Ready? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, the next time I decide to try to teach about God in one class, somebody write me a note and say, Rabbi, that's crazy. So we're going to do this a little bit different. I actually want to do my best to share a statement of personal faith. I am certain that we have so many different types of thoughts and beliefs when it comes to God. And I'm certain that one class is not going to change those opinions. And I am absolutely certain that I cannot turn a person who has long settled lack of belief. But what I can do is say, you know, Jewish concepts about God are very diverse, divergent, and rich. And if you allow yourself to challenge your assumptions and to say, is there something here that might be different than what I encountered about God when I was younger, that might be an interesting thing. I find, you know, the name of this class is, you know, what we did not learn in Hebrew school. I find that sometimes we hold on to views of God that are views of God that don't reflect the breadth, depth, and diversity of Jewish tradition. So what I want to try to do today is take you through the development of those concepts. I want to start with the Bible because your origin story defines where you'll go. But what's so interesting is how far we have gone from our origin story. And so often, if there's a piece of that origin story that we reject in terms of belief, that's where our exploration ends. So I want to encourage us to see through a longer period of development. And what that means that I'm going to ask you to do is something that's very counterintuitive to me as a teacher. As a teacher, I love giving a text and hearing about it from 50 points of view. And we end up covering 2 or 3 texts per class, and it's wonderful and delicious. I actually have 9 pages of text to share with you today. And I'm going to actually ask people to hold off on comments. If you want to send me a chat of a thought that you want to talk about, feel free to do that. I always feel bad if I cut somebody off, and I don't want to do that. But what I want to do is I want to have a range of the development of Jewish ideas for you to struggle with. The other piece is, if you would, have a piece of paper. The power of a piece of paper is you can take each concept and maybe reflect, what does it mean to you? Because my interest today, my thesis when I come to my own personal statement of faith, is that I believe extraordinarily passionately that Judaism gives room for each person to find their own path. And too often we define faith and belief by what we hear the leader and or teacher teach. I'd like to see if in reflecting about some of these texts, you come to your own pieces. By the way, those pieces can also be disbelief. And I want to put out from the very, very outset that a piece of my struggling with faith is certainly, where was God? Where was God as people were suffering so terribly? And if God is meant to be powerful, good, just, why wouldn't God have intervened? And the reason I've been able to embrace faith is that I've explored that supposition and said, maybe God doesn't intervene because God's given us freedom. And that results in terrible evil. And can there be other aspects of God that I can embrace? Other people have said, I just can't go there. But what I can do is I can say, maybe I can reinterpret God to mean that which is godly. And so all of these pieces of texts will weave into what we talked about last week, which is we are created in the divine image and we emulate God. And even if we don't believe in God, we can be godly. And that these texts which explore divine traits and what our beliefs are can actually weave themselves back on us in terms of who we are as humans seeking to be godly, which I actually think then might lead us back maybe even to God. But that's me. That's me. So I want you to hold on to all of your doubt, skepticism, and disbelief, while also opening your heart to other possibilities and other thoughts. I'll begin with two more pieces. One is that when you talk about God, what you're really talking about is, for me, we're talking about a mystery that we can never understand or wrap our arms around. So I begin my lesson with a lot of humility and acknowledgement of the inadequacy of both language and humanity to describe that which is mysterious, ineffable, beyond. And so I want to start with that. The other piece is we do our best as humans to understand our own belief systems as best we can. And the theology teacher who I had at the seminary, Professor Neil Gilman, asked us to do something really hard. He said, I want you to rewrite your theology every 5 years. And he says, if your theology is not changing from writing to writing, you are not growing. And I've held on to that, and I've tried to do that. I want to ask you, if you haven't done that, to take a first shot. What is it that I believe? What is it that I believe about God? And so that is the beginning. But I want to start with one more question. Can you be a good Jew and not believe in God? And the answer to that is, of course. There is a beautiful midrash where God says, better they had rejected me and kept my mitzvot, which is an interesting statement because it says Judaism is all about your actions and your deeds, far more important than your beliefs. That doesn't mean that beliefs are not important, and it doesn't mean that God is not central. You can absolutely be a good Jew who has doubts. So at this point, I'm going to ask, really stay with each text. Again, I will have these texts sent out to you after class with the question of, what does this text call on me to do? Okay, can everybody see the text?
Mhm.
And I'm going to have my, if you want to send a chat or you want to raise a hand, feel free to do that, but know that we're going to move through these. I'll stop at a couple places. The essential Jewish belief is monotheism. You know that one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And so my existential question to you is, what does it mean for you that God is one? What does that mean to you? And I hope that if you'll have these discussions either with me with people who you're watching with, or people who you're seeing on screen. You know, typically, I think what was meant by that is that it said God is not zero. In other words, we begin with affirming a belief. It's also a rejection in many ways of polytheism. There are many gods that people would worship. And that sense of, no, there's one God who is the God of all. And that God is unique. And it also rejects dualism, a God of evil. It rejects pantheism, nature is God. Monotheism actually makes a lot of demands on you in terms of faith, in terms of belief. And this becomes the coda that we repeat in the morning and the evening. And so while you do not need to believe in God to be a good Jew, part of being a Jew is affirming one God. And the danger of what I'm going to do today is I'm not allowing enough space for people to give me dozens of interpretations of what that could mean. So Arthur Green says that unity is our unity as a people. And therefore we are united through our connectedness. And that's what it means to say God is one. We are of one beating heart together with humanity on earth and divine which is above. Ooh, some people say that God is one means that there is one set of laws that is expected for us. Some people would say, in other words, what does this text mean for you? What does it call upon you to do? When we start the Torah begins with God who has created heaven and earth. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. The earth was unformed and void, darkness on the face of the deep. The Spirit of God hovered above the face of the waters. God said, let there be light. There was light, morning and evening, day one. And I want you to ask yourself, reflection question number 2 for your booklets is, does the concept of God as creator move you? How great are your works, O Lord. And as I am trying to share my own personal faith and theology, I would say that for me, the ability to marvel at creation, to express how diverse and extraordinary creation is, and to connect that to God is a piece of the foundation upon which I build my faith. I'm going to show you later on how rabbinic text, which probably are thousands of years after these texts, take each of these concepts and run with them in interesting ways. But as I'm thinking about God as creator, I wanted to read to you a quote from Albert Einstein. Einstein writes, "The most beautiful and deepest experience a person can have is the sense of the mysterious. It is the underlying principle of religion, as well as of all serious endeavor in science and art. One who never had this experience seems to me, if not dead, at least blind. The sense that behind anything that can be experienced, there's something that our mind cannot grasp, whose beauty and sublimity reaches us only indirectly and as feeble reflection. That is religiousness." For me, God as creator is lifting up that mysterious and sublime world. And at the Friday night prayers, when I say, "Ma gadlu ma'asecha," how great are your works, my heart is very deeply moved. One of the things we need to do is we understand the origins of Jewish belief is to walk through our history. By the way, I don't think I should have started with Abraham. I should have started with Noah, where God is angry at human behavior. So what do we believe about God? That God cares about our behavior. And God was so angry that God destroyed the world and then said, I'm never going to do this again. But it's almost like a start over. But we have a sense of God through that story. In the Adam and Eve story, we have a God who says there are certain rules by which you live. There's a sense of obedience. Abraham, God says, go forth from your native land. The Hebrew is lech lecha, literally go to yourself. I wonder if a piece of the prime directive, in other words, the first Jew, how evolve, impact subsequent history, is that faith means turning inward. And a deep piece of my faith comes through understanding who I am as a human. And so your reflection question for this text is, how does self-understanding weave into hearing the call of God? Go to yourself, go to a different land. Our first commandment to the first Jew was connected to land. And we believe that God has a sense of being a nation and a people. And it's so interesting that that continues to play out in modern times. Israel is the connectedness to a place that's special, that's different. And then God says, go forth from your native land, your father's house, to the land that I will show you. Might it be that faith requires a personal journey? How is my faith different than my parents' faith? Would be your reflective question. It says, I'll make you a great nation. God's relationship to us is connected to being part of a people. And am I seeing religion as part of peoplehood and my relationship to God as part of peoplehood? Because I think living in America, we often see religion as individual faith, as opposed to communal/national. And then here is the first blessing given to Abraham. The first blessing in the Bible is to be fruitful and multiply. The first blessing to Abraham is, I'll bless you, I'll make your name great, you shall be a blessing. The commandment to Abraham is to be a blessing. Faith in God is woven together with a behavioral imperative to be a blessing. And as I share with you my personal faith is that as I am a blessing and bring blessing, I feel a sense of connection to that which is beyond, to that which is God. And so how does being a blessing affect your sense of God? You're going to have a lot to write about after class. Abraham continues to inform our relationship with God. And this is probably the paradigmatic story of the Abraham narrative. Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Since Abraham is to become a great populous nation, and all the nations of the earth are to bless themselves by them. By the way, we've gotten so familiar with the story that we forget what an absurd question that is. It's an absurd question. If God is God, God can do whatever the heck God wants to do to whoever it is that God wants to do it, because God's God. Why is God asking a human being? And so from the beginnings of our faith, from the first Jew, there is a sense that God and man are in a mutual covenant of ethical accountability. And that God sets up as faith the ability to hold God to an ethical standard. It's a theology of chutzpah. And you all know the story. You know, he says, I need to tell him what I'm going to do to this terrible place, Sodom and Gomorrah, because I've seen that they've done terrible. So what does he say? Will you sweep away the innocent with the guilty? What if they're 50? Will you then wipe it out and not forgive it for the sake of the innocent? Far be it for you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as the guilty. so that innocent and guilty fare alike. And this may be the line that I believe is a faith definer. Far be it for you, shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? What do Jews believe about God? That God is accountable to a higher morality. God is accountable to the ideals that God has revealed. And so a piece of my faith is the ability to question. And I actually think that when you have the ability to question, which is so different than other faiths, which talk about submission, when you have the ability to question, it confers a dignity upon your faith. So I actually am going to ask you to ask a very hard question in terms of your own faith with this one. Are there places where you would ask this question of God? Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? And this is couched within respect. Were I to venture to speak, let not the Lord be angry. What if 30? I venture again. What if 20? Let the Lord not be angry. What if there are 10? I will not destroy. The beginning of Jewish faith is the power of asking the hard question. And it may be that in the ability to question, that we find a faith that we can embrace. I skipped Isaac because Isaac has other insights, but I don't know that he has theological insights. Jacob is fascinating. So from Abraham, we have the sense of God connected to peoplehood, God connected to being a blessing and morality, God connected to questioning. And every single one of these things is going to remanifest themselves in rabbinical literature. Jacob, though, has this deep sense of God who he hadn't been aware of. He leaves Beersheba, he goes out to Haran. The context matters. His brother Esau is going to kill him. He's escaping for his life. He came upon a certain place and stopped there for a night. The sun had set. Taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. Boy, I wish we could study this text more in depth. Laying down on a stone. This is a man whose life is full of hard things and stones and rocks. He has a dream, a stairway set on the ground. It reached top to heaven. The angels were going up and down it. God was standing. I am the Lord, the God of your father, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God identifies God's self via connectedness to family. The ground which you're lying, I'll assign to you and your offsprings. Again, we have land, nation. Themes are repeating. Your descendants shall be as dust of the earth. We're imagining what will be. You'll spread out northwest, east, and south. The families of all the earth shall bless themselves by you. Again, a repeated theme in your descendants. Remember, I am with you. I will protect you. That becomes a piece of faith that some of us say, where were you, God? And others of you said, I've had moments when I have felt that. It may not be that there was exactly the outcome that I would have wanted, but I felt a sense of God with me, a sense of protection. So one question I want you to ask yourself from the Jacob text, have you had a moment where you have felt God with you? Rabbi Ilana gave a sermon a few weeks ago how she often felt a sense of God's light. And then as she kind of started to ask all of those hard theological questions and got subsumed in a community where, doubt was so strong that sense kind of left her. And she was talking about how in our dialogue with the African-American community in Cleveland, so many of them were driven by a faith that said, God is with me and God protects me. And she wonders whether or not there was something to be explored in that. Have you ever had that moment? And I will share with you that I have. I don't know that I've even shared that with you because, the second you open yourself up for that, it's vulnerable in a way that we're not comfortable with. But there's a deep sense that I will share with you of having felt that in profound ways. Wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, I will not leave until I have done what I've promised you. Jacob awoke from his sleep. Surely the Lord is in this spot, and I did not know. How awesome is this place? There's none other than the abode of God, and that's the gateway to heaven. We could spend classes talking about this dream, the implication of it. At Shavuot, Stephanie Etzbach-Dell, I don't know if Stephanie's on because I'm only seeing the piece. She was on last week. Stephanie said that for her, this story is how Jacob didn't jump onto the ladder when he could have, and how often we don't do that. For me, the story, I love that explanation. For me, the story is how often God is right there and we choose not to see God because we're so wrapped up in our own lives, our own fears, our own angers, our own stories. And for me, a theology that says, can I open up my heart so that I can feel a sense of God being there at times when I might overlook that? That for me is a piece of my faith. So I've wanted today's study with all of these texts to be an extraordinary examination of personal faith. Your next question is, are there times when you might not see God when God is present? When are those times? What is it that causes you not to be able to perceive divine in your presence? And Jacob is such an interesting one. Jacob wrestles with God, angel, man. The text is utterly ambiguous, and this is one of my favorite texts in the whole Torah. Everyone is on the other side. He's alone. The man wrestles with him until the break of dawn. His socket of his hip is strained. Let me go. I will not let you go unless you bless me. What's your name? Jacob. Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Yisrael, because you have wrestled with divine and humans and prevailed. Those of you who've studied with me before know that I've often seen this as Jacob struggling with his own conscience, his own sense of who am I going to be? The guy who is always striving and grabbing, or the guy who appreciates other people and their blessings. And it's only when we wrestle with those pieces of ourselves that we find our own ability to create connections. But I want to suggest for today's class that the concept of wrestling with God is a powerful, powerful window into faith. And I think that one of the reasons I felt I could become a rabbi, even amidst terrible doubts in terms of, do I believe in God? What kind of God do I believe in? Was that we come from a legacy of those who wrestle with God. And I've shared with the community a piece by Elie Wiesel, who said, you know, I can be angry at God. I can sometimes doubt God, but I always wrestle with God. And so where has wrestling with God played out in your life? Is your question for this one. What does it mean to have a faith that says you get to wrestle? And I believe that what this does is it creates a lot of room for doubt. It creates a lot of room for saying, I don't know. It creates a lot of room even for anger and connecting our own sense of self with our sense of faith. So we move from Jacob. By the way, Joseph had a deep sense of God with him in Egypt. So our patriarchs and our matriarchs give us our origin stories. They're stories of wrestling, of questioning, of awareness, of unawareness, of goodness, of creation, of God's frustration with us, of God's dependence upon us in terms of creating ethical imperative, and a God who allows questioning. For me, the faith that emerges from the pages of Genesis is interesting. But it's Moses who truly then brings us to a deeper, deeper faith. Moses' first encounter with God is at the burning bush. What does it mean to say God was in the burning bush, the bush that was not consumed? We begin to be, and we have this with the patriarchs, but I want to introduce it here. We begin to encounter God who is reflected upon metaphorically. And for me, the metaphor of God as fire is a powerful one, because what metaphor can do is metaphor can create a window into our own soul. Metaphor can bridge truth. It can embody truth of inner life. And the metaphor of God as fire has always been an interesting for me. In a second, I'm going to stop this and let people reflect a little bit, because I've been going for a good half hour. I'm going to ask you what metaphors speak to you. By the way, that's one where you almost need the whole rest of Jewish tradition, because the rabbis' metaphors and the prayer book metaphors are all very, very developed. But the concept of God as fire, mystery, no form, can both warm and pull in while also hurt and burn. It's transfixing fire. And Moses had to pay attention in order to realize the bush was not consumed. So the concept of God in this bush that was not consumed gives us concepts that we battle with, not that we battle with, that we pull into our own soul. And what does God do? He sees that Moses had turned aside. God wants to be in relationship with people who are paying attention. So a piece of the story for me right here is, am I paying attention? And that's what God wants me to do at the burning bush. What do I do with burning? And God says, Moses, Moses, and what does Moses say? My favorite word, Hineni. Here I am. Boy, write a little line. Am I hearing the call of my name, and am I responding, Hineni? The cry of the Israelites has reached me. This is a really important theological statement. It's a statement that God is a God who responds to suffering. God is a God who responds to the pain of the Israelites. I've seen how the Egyptians oppressed them. So when we have Abraham, who's told to be a blessing, and we see that God's initial appearance to us is as one who rejects slavery, we're left with a theology that says God does not tolerate such behavior. Come, I'll send you to Pharaoh. And here to me is a whole nother piece of theology, is that God requires human agency in order to bring divine principles to life. And so my questions again, how am I responding to the divine call to bring freedom? And as you know from last week, the texts, all of these are speaking to our times in powerful ways. And for me, this is the call not just of justice that I've internalized. This is the call of God. And I actually say those words carefully and passionately. Free my people. Shlach et ami. And I love that Moses is one who is in honest relationship. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? We get to give all of our doubts to God. This is not a religion of pure submission. God said, I'll be with you. And that to me is a powerful theological statement that builds on Jacob. That shall be a sign that it was I who sent you. And when you freed the people from Egypt, you'll worship God at this mountain. So there's a concept of ongoing revelation and places of revelation. Moses said to God, when I come to the Israelites and they say, the God of your fathers has sent me, and they say, what's his name? What shall I say? God said to Moses, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. And this for me is a fundamental faith statement. You shall say to the Israelites, Ehyeh sent me. God said to Moses, thus shall you speak of the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This shall be my name forever and my appellation for all eternity. So I'm going to stop the share right there. And I see all of your faces. And I'm going to ask you to unmute if you have an answer or to give me a hand. My question is, what does it mean to say that God's name is Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh? And I want to make that deeper. The reason I didn't translate it, it is often translated in Torahs as I am what I am. But Ehyeh is future tense. I will be what I will be. I will be what I will be. My name is I will be. And note that the name for God, Yud He Vav He, he will be. That's God's name, Adonai. It's a form of be. It's also a breath. Yeah. We can do so much with this. What does it mean to call God, I will be what I will be? Give me a hand. Give me a thought. Unmute. Not all at once. There should be lots for this one. I see Ed and Sandra have unmuted.
No, we haven't.
No, okay. We didn't know that we did.
We didn't, but that's okay. I guess we,
Do you have a thought?
I think in the name is also God's affirmation that I am continuously morphing, if you will.
Uh-huh. I will be, I'm not who I am right now because I am still becoming.
That's right. And I will always be becoming.
I will always be becoming. By the way, that for me, if you ask for me, what's the line of the Torah that reflects your theology best? It would be this one. God is becoming, and my job, my wrestling, my theological passion is to say, who is God right now? And what it does is it leaves the door open to understand God differently at different times of life. It leaves the door open for our people to have understood God differently at different moments of history. It allows for a very personal faith, and it allows for an evolving faith. So thesis number one in terms of the Jewish view of God is that the Jewish view of God is always changing, as reflected in the name, I will be what I will be. What else? Yochanan, and then the Shermans. Barry.
And the I am continually becoming concept of God, God is continually becoming, is said at a time when there is about to be an intervention in history. So that sense of the absolute being that contains the entire universe is evolving and becoming, is doing that in interaction with all us finite beings. That becomingness is being developed, discovered, played out in interaction with all of us beings.
I'm becoming based upon what you will do with my call to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So God will not be until we make God what God should be. And when we looked at that interconnection that was part of Abraham's relationship with God, we're going to see it in Moses in deep ways. There is this interconnection between divine and human that is an incredible piece of a Jewish foundation of theology. Barry Sherman.
When we speak of becoming or will be, are we not speaking a bit about process? That we are evolving and that we are in God's image and that we are partners in that process.
So one of
And-
the theologies of our times is something called process theology. And process theology is just what you talked about. That sense of we are in the process of becoming as we continue to grow and change. And we will come to interesting texts that talk about how over the course of time, we understood God in very, very, very different ways. And when you allow yourself to be part of a process, it lets that ongoing sense of discovery and interaction be a huge piece of what faith should be. We are in process.
But it is in opposition to our casual use of thinking or talking about God, in which we inadvertently, consciously or unconsciously, think of God as a puppeteer.
We have limited God by taking certain aspects of moments of faith or people who have a certain belief system and making that the totality. And I'm going to make, I don't know that it's such a bold statement. I really believe that that does a huge disservice to faith that can be. That people feeling that they are empowered to grow in faith, to change in faith, to engage in communal discussion of how we understand God is actually the ideal that's presented in the word Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. Okay, Linda.
I think I'm also thinking about the fact that God doesn't have really the inclination or power to change like the Holocaust and the course of human history, but he's saying, I will be what I will be. I'm there, I support you, I weep also, but that's what I will be. That's what I can be.
So you're reading it this way, I think. I will be with you.
Right.
I will be with you. By the way, a theology of I will be with you, for me, is a very powerful theology. It's not a God who intervenes, but a God who is present. And I think you can have a God who is present who doesn't intervene. Ed and Sandra, is that another hand up?
Yeah.
And then Rick and Ann.
Let me throw in Buber here. Man in search of God and God in search of man. You know, a dialectic.
We can't hear you, Ed.
So Ed is quoting Heschel of God in search of man and man in search of God, and that there's a dialectic and a connection.
That's right. And it's part of this evolution that we're talking about, this ongoing, continuing evolution.
The ongoing evolution. And so for me, one of the things I certainly couldn't do in this, brief presentation is take you to modern philosophy. But one of the modern philosophies who speaks to me powerfully is Heschel. I also love Buber, who talks about as we are present fully to fellow human, we come to understand the divine. Process theology we've started to talk about. Rick and Ann.
I think it could mean that I will be what you need me to be. I don't have a specific name because I will be whatever you need me to be. Whatever you tell me.
In other words, if I'm with you, then I'm going to need to adapt to who you are. And we're going to see these interesting texts that really take us there. By the way, this could mean so many things. So your next question of reflection is, what does it mean to say God is, I will be what I will be? Because it may mean actually something very different than anyone has suggested yet. I am so incomprehensible that you can't describe me or contain me in words. I'll be what I'll be. I'll be with you. I will be different things to different people. I will be there at different times as you evolve and as you change and as you grow. So for me, a foundational piece of faith is Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, and it's opening up the concept of connecting to God via metaphor. Okay. One of the things that also gets lifted up here is that we connect to God by different names. And the question I asked you earlier is a question I really want you to think about. What are the metaphors that speak to you? And you heard me at this last High Holidays talk about how I finally found ways to connect to the prayer book, both as a way to challenge me regarding behavior, the power to pray honestly, but that sense of exploring a metaphor so that I can live in personal faith. I love the metaphor of fire. I love the metaphor of God as rock, sur. I love the metaphor of God as teacher. I love, I love the metaphor of God as harachaman, the compassionate one. So by letter F, I want you to explore and ask, what metaphors speak to me? And they may in fact be new metaphors or different metaphors, although there are literally dozens of metaphors throughout Jewish text. God, what do we believe about God? God gives us covenant. God made a covenant with us at Horeb. The reason I'm bringing you the Deuteronomy text and not the Exodus text is because it says, is it not just with our fathers God made this, but with us, the living, every one of us who's here? Face to face, God spoke to you on the mountain. I make this covenant not just with you alone, those who are standing here this day, but with those who are not here with us today. One of the things we would say about faith is that God has revealed Torah. That's a whole nother series of classes. Revelation can actually be, this came from God, or this is what we understand to be from God, but a piece of how we connect to God is via deed. And so how does my receiving of Torah connect me to God? Just as Abraham defended those who were innocent in Sodom and Gomorrah, Moses takes it a step further. I didn't bring you this whole text because I didn't want you to have a 20-page document, just a 10-page one. This is the most extraordinary text where God says, get out of here. I'm going to destroy them and make a new nation out of you. By the way, it's not God doing like God did with Abraham saying, what do you think? And Abraham saying, well, if there's some innocent ones, save them. This one is God saying, I'm going to destroy them. I've had it. And Moses saying, no. The ability to hold God to moral accountability is a huge piece of faith. How that plays out now, I'm not sure. However, the book that I was hawking a couple of years ago, Daniel Hartman, Putting God Second, says that the top piece for every Jew has to be ethics and morality, with even God subject to that morality. So for him, Abraham failed the test when God said, take your son. That was him being overly intoxicated with a sense of God. It's how people misuse God. His job was to hold God accountable to morality as Moses did. Our job is to have chutzpah. But there's also a belief that God loves us. God says it's not because you're, numerous. It's actually because you're small. God loves you because God had this relationship with your ancestors. And that sense of feeling God's love, I don't know that it's a piece of my faith. I brought it because I want to constantly be challenging myself and to say, should it be a piece of my faith? So my question to you for letter I is this a piece of your faith? Moses experiences God face to face. And when we talk about that, we have to talk about a juxtaposition of opposite points of view. On the one hand, God says, Moses is the only one who speaks to me face to face, but in another place, God says, you cannot see my face and live. That's a pretty flagrant contradiction, unless it was different things at different times. Right after the golden calf, Moses says to God, show me your ways. Hareni et drachecha. Let me see you. And I will tell you, at moments when I've had that deep sense of God, God's presence, that desire to know what that is, has made this a poignant line for me. a line that I need to continue to explore. And God says, you know what? I can't show you my face, because if you do, you can't see me and live. But I can hide you in the cleft. You can see my backside. And God passes before him, and we know this famous words, Adonai, Adonai, el rachum v'chanum. I am compassionate. I'm gracious. I'm slow to anger. I'm full of kindness and faithfulness, kindness to the 1,000th generation. I forgive iniquity, transgression, and sin. Yet God does not remit all punishment. God visits the iniquity of the parents unto the children and the children's children upon the 3rd and 4th generation. We're going to come back to that. But for me, we begin to see with Moses an understanding and relationship with God via divine trait. And I want to challenge you to say, how do each of these traits connect to you, both in terms of how you are godly, compassion being the most prominent one here, and what does grace mean? And for me, that's the ability to see the other fully in a way that isn't judgmental. Slow to anger, how are we reflecting these pieces? What would be the attributes that we would give to God were we to make this list? We're going to come back to that. There's a whole genre of literature when it comes to God that needs to be explored, and that's the prophets. So God in defending Moses from the attacks of his brother and sister says, you know what? I speak to most prophets in a dream. So there's this concept of someone who is in connection with God and receives divine message, revelation. Moses I speak to face to face. He beholds the likeness. But I wanted to bring you prophets because prophets had this passionate personal experience of God. And they're an important moment in our history. And through reading how they experience God, the text will often have us revisit a previous biblical scene and have that scene reinterpreted. Elijah is fleeing from those who want to kill him. And he's despondent. Why are you? I'm moved by zeal. He had this whole confrontation with the prophets of Baal where they were consumed by fire and they're still going to come and kill him. The Israelites have forsaken the covenant, torn down your altars, put your prophets to the sword. I alone am alive. They're going to take my life. God says, come, stand on this mountain before the Lord. And we learn that that is the same mountain of the Lord that Moses was at. So we are going to re-encounter Sinai. Sinai in Exodus 19 is full of thunder, fire, lightning. And now God passes by. Do you hear the echo to the Moses story? God passed by. This is a moment of intense revelation. There was a great and mighty wind, splitting mountains, shattering rocks, the power of the Lord, but God wasn't in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. All of these things where we experienced God in Exodus 19 are happening, but God's not there. After the earthquake, fire, that's exactly what happened at Sinai. God wasn't in the fire. After the fire, kol d'mamataka, a still small voice. And when I wrote my first theological paper, I talked about the still small voice, opening my heart to the still small voice of my own self, and might it even be the still small voice of God who speaks to me. And so my question for you in this one is, have you heard that voice? Have you had those moments of quiet where you've encountered the ineffable? Might God be in silence rather than in the grandeur of bursting into history and the creation of a different modality of experience? God is for me a piece of the Elijah story. I will be what I will be. At Sinai with the Israelites, I needed to be big, loud, boisterous, overwhelming. With you now, it's quiet. And the ability to experience God in different ways is a powerful piece of faith. The prophets had a deep pathos for God. They, in fact, talked about a God who suffered because we've so rejected God. And the sense of intertwined, when we reject God, God cannot be present in the earth. And so the prophets felt that God who suffered, and the rabbis are going to build on that. And so one of the things that I really want you to see in this class is how generations build on previous ideas, and it lets us evolve and grow. The prophets had miracles, they had symbolic acts, but the key piece of the prophets, and you can see where the roots of this were in terms of Moses, the receiving of Torah, the ethics of the Torah. The essence of the prophets is an ethical imperative. This is what God wants. And a piece of Jewish faith has to be an interaction with a God who has a moral imperative. And I brought you the line that is just such a beautiful line. The line from Micah. God has told you, human, what is good, what God requires you. Do justice, love goodness, walk modestly with your God. And every single prophet has lines like that. Beautiful lines of the ethical imperative. By the way, the piece that becomes problematic in the prophets that we have to acknowledge because it's going to be responded to is the affirmation that God will punish. I'm going to use Assyria and punish you because you've been so rotten. That gets turned over in subsequent texts. So this is what makes me a non-fundamentalist. I believe that within the Torah itself, there is evolution of ideas about God. For instance, the book of Job takes this concept of God punishes those who are evil, and we learn that Job is not evil, that Job is good. And his friends come and say, well, you must have done something bad you weren't aware of, and God rebukes them. Now, I don't know that I love the answer. You can't understand God, I'm God and you're not. But the fact that we're able to question the assumption, for me, lets me make sense of the theological problem of why didn't God help that wonderful person who was going through such a tough time? And the book of Job lifts up that question. The book of Jonah rejects the concept of a sinner who deserves punishment being punished. That line, God, you are El Rachum V'Chanun, you are gracious, compassionate, forgiving, not remitting punishment, visiting the iniquity of parents. That line is taken out of Jonah. It's taken out. Jonah likes the good old-fashioned God who gives a good smiting to the sinners. He says, God, I know that you are gracious and compassionate, extending forgiveness to iniquity, and that you renounce punishment. He shifts the end of this because how we understand God has changed by the time of the book of Jonah. And I, by the way, for all that I said I am a non-fundamentalist, I actually think that I am having absolute fidelity to sacred text when I say that there is evolution, that Job rejects the concept of reward and punishment being based upon goodness, that Jonah rejects the sinner being punished, where in fact the sinner has the opportunity to change. And it uses themes from the book and the story of Noah, which is a story of punishment of sinners, and turns it on its head. So within the story, there are subversive sequels. That's exciting. Makes studying the book exciting. The book of Deuteronomy is such a different book than the book of Exodus. In the book of Exodus, God would appear from the heavens and bring plagues and split seas. The book of Deuteronomy, God is not bursting into history. There's no supernatural intervention. fact, there's an interesting line. I shall hide my face from them. I shall see what their end will be. My question for you is the sense of, what does it mean to say God is hidden? Because it allows for a God that is still present, who's more difficult to find. And I think that a piece of modern faith has to be a faith that creates space for how difficult it is to find God, the God of Deuteronomy. By the way, Purim, the book of Esther, utterly subverts the concept of a God who is intervening. There's no God swooping in to save us. God is not directly mentioned. You know, all you get is, who knows but that help will come from another place. Maybe this is the reason you were here. There is destiny, but you have to realize your own destiny. This is human agency. And when people say, I don't believe in God because God has not saved, I always want to say to them, that's the same theology as the book of Esther. And the book of Esther says, you have to do it yourself. So awareness of the evolution within our tradition is really, really important. So I've taken us through the Bible up to rabbinic literature, and I'm gonna pause for a second to allow anyone who has a thought or a comment to give a thought or a comment before then going to rabbinic literature, which I think you're gonna find fascinating. Joe.
Well,
Go ahead, Joe.
I think one of the concerns always is when most of us who study the Torah see exactly what God is able to do when he has a relationship and he's able to talk with people like Moses or anybody else. And when he doesn't talk to somebody, doesn't mean that God is not there. And so we need to be able to see the difference between what happens in the Torah, where God speaks to people and intervenes, and when he either withdraws, or you have to have a relationship and you have to have a belief that God exists and that you have a relationship with God, and that not every problem is going to get solved by God. You're going to have to do some of it yourself in relationship with your belief in God. And so, just because one of the most popular, holidays is Pesach, where we talk about how God redeemed us in some ways. And then we talk about other things that happen, as Linda mentioned earlier, when there was the Holocaust and people said, well, where was God? And you have to take some action on your own sometimes and still have that belief in God. And some people say, for example, maybe Martin Luther King still had the ability to talk with God, or had God speak to him, or other people like that, whether it's Heschel or anybody else. Maybe they had a relationship in which they believe that God is speaking to them directly, whether or not God is actually talking to them or not, or they have that strong belief that they have that relationship and it's important for them to act.
Beautiful. And when you have these texts that we've laid out, you have the ability to connect in to the God who is hidden. You have an ability to connect in to the still small voice. You have an ability to connect in to the sense of, I will be with you, even if you can't feel the intervention. And so it creates for a much more, a potential for much more depth of faith. And wait till you see what the rabbis did with it. Harriet.
Well, just to speak to what Joe was saying, it's a question of maturation on our part and on God's part. And I have this book of synonyms, and I looked up become, and it's grow into, develop into, pass into, evolve into, ripen into, mature into, turn into, alter into, convert into, transform, mellow, wax, So it's all about growing.
Nice.
And maturing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, are you guys ready? Wait till you see what the rabbis did with all of this. The rabbis are not monolithic either. So I want to be careful here in terms of this presentation, because I certainly cherry picked. And there are other verses that are quite different than this and contrary. But I wanted to leave you with the rabbis take each of these things and develop it. So that's where you get the midrash about, you know, the people sometimes thinks in the Torah, how is it that Abraham became a monotheist? Through his logic. He realized these were just stones. You know, the woman comes in with flour, here, give this to the gods. He smashes them. His dad who owns the store, who did this? Would I hide this? A woman came and said, offer it. I offered it. One said, I want to eat first. The other said, I want to eat first. The biggest one smashed all the others. Are you making fun of me? They can't do anything. Abraham said, you say they cannot. Let your ears hear what your mouth is saying. In other words, sometimes theology tries to prove its point. And one of the pieces of rabbinical literature is trying to find reasons that would support monotheism. And so for them, the illogic of polytheism is one of the reasons why they would say this makes sense. I wanted you to have that text, but I really want you, by the way, there's beautiful rabbinic texts about creation, a la what I brought you with Einstein. Look how many animals there are in the world. How many beasts, how many fish? Is the voice of any one of them like the voice of the other? The appearance of any one of them like the appearance of the other? How great are your works, O Lord. That ability to marvel at creation. And by the way, I believe in evolution, but I also believe in the grandeur of creation. Here's where rabbinic literature gets interesting. The rabbis had to struggle with, why aren't there more prophets who hear the word of God and then bring the word of God into the world? And the answer is, you can't really know who's a prophet and who's not, who's divine and who's not. So they bring you this famous story. They're debating about whether an oven is kosher. And Rabbi Eliezer brings all the proofs in the world, but all the other rabbis would not accept the answer, would not accept them. So he says, you know what? We're gonna do a good old miracle. If the law is according to me, let the carob tree prove it. It jumps 100 feet, some say 400. By the way, I think I would have believed. If I had seen the old carob tree jumping, I would have believed. I said, no, we don't learn proof from a carob tree. In other words, all kinds of strange stuff happens. Okay, then let the stream of water prove it. So the stream of water flows backwards. Again, I think I would have given in. No proofs from a stream of water. In other words, he's bringing miracles. And they're saying, no, we don't learn proofs from a stream. Then he says, if it's according to me, let the walls of the house of study prove it. They start to tumble. Then another rabbi stands up and says, stop. They say to him, then he says, if it's according to me, let the heavens prove it. And a voice comes from heaven. Why do you dispute, Rabbi Eliezer? The law is according to him in every case. If I heard a voice, I'd believe. My dad, who's a big non-believer, would often say to me, if I just saw one good parting of a sea, I'd believe. Here, the rabbis got to see God speaking. The laws according to Rabbi Eliezer. Why do you dispute? Rabbi Joshua stands up, lo b'shamayim hi. He, by the way, quotes God to disprove God. Because it says it's not in the heaven, it's close to you. What's the meaning of not in the heaven? Rabbi Jeremiah said, the Torah has been given once and for all. We don't listen to voices from heaven. In other words, prophecy doesn't work anymore. If you've already written in the Torah, after the majority, one must incline. The rabbis would vote. But then they take you, the story could end there. Rabbi Nathan comes upon Elijah. He says to him, what did God do at that moment? God smiled and said, my children have defeated me. My children have defeated me. In other words, they are willing to quote me against me. And I think God's smiling because God realizes that this is the only way we can bring God into the world, through study, through majority, and it's flawed. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. So for me, this is a deep faith statement that faith is imperfect. Sometimes we get it wrong, and that's okay. The best we can do is to use our intellect, to use our precedent and the power of understanding God through the mind that's connected to the heart. And we can no longer rely on miracles because miracles are unreliable. Look at this next one. This next one pictures Moses on the mountain and God's putting those little crowns on the letters. Have people seen those little crowns? They're like little parts that are attached to the letters that look like crowns, and it makes a Torah text beautiful. But Moses says, what are you doing this for? And God says, well, someday in the future, a guy named Akiva ben Joseph will make heaps of interpretations just based on these little crowns. Let me see him. And it's almost like a dream state. God says, turn around. And Moses is in Akiva's academy. He sat in the back to listen to class. By the way, the good students all sit in the front. The bad students sit in the back. And Moses didn't understand what was going on, and he was distressed. In other words, look how far law has come. The initial lawgiver didn't understand the people who were interpreting the law that he gave. Do people understand how radical that is? This is a statement that there's the Constitution, but it's the interpretation of the Constitution that sometimes turns the original words on its head that makes it relevant. Finally, a subject came up, and the students asked Akiva, how do you know this? And Akiva said, oh, it's a teaching of Moses from Mount Sinai. And he was pleased, like, phew, they haven't forgotten me. This is an important story. And the reason it's an important story is because for me, it's a story from tradition that says tradition evolves. Tradition sometimes evolves so radically that we don't even know from where it came, and that's good. Look at this next one. Because God appeared to Israel at the Red Sea as a mighty warrior waging war, and appeared to them at Sinai as an educator teaching Torah, and appeared to them in the days of Daniel as an elder, in the days of Solomon as a young man. God said to Israel, even though you see me in different images, I am the same. I am God who is with you at Sinai. I am the Lord, thy God. Thy is singular. In other words, you understand God differently as a generation than other generations do. What this opens the door to is it opens the door to saying how we understand God has to differ from generation to generation. And so my question to you is, how do you understand God in ways that are different than your previous generation? And often we think that fidelity to Torah is understanding Torah the same way as previous generations did. And I think that this gives us permission and demands of us that we view it differently. This next text you've heard me teach. Why were the groups of sages known as the men of the Great Assembly? They restored the crown of divine attributes to the way it had once been. Because Moses said, God, you are great, mighty, and awesome. You know that from the Amidah. Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanorla. God, you are all three of these things, great, mighty, and awesome. Jeremiah said, oh no, strangers are destroying the temple. Where are God's awesome deeds? Where's God's Norah? So that's when he prayed to God, he just said, Ha'el Hagadol V'Hagibor, great and mighty God, whose name is Lord of hosts, omitting the attribute awesome. Do you get how huge that is? Saying that Jeremiah didn't say something that Moses attributed to God. Daniel came and said, strangers are enslaving God's children. Where are God's mighty deeds? Thus, Daniel's prayer Daniel prayed, oh, great, awesome God, leaving out mighty. How could they omit something established by Moses? Rabbi Eliezer said, since they knew that the Holy One, blessed be God, insists on truth, they were unable to say any false things about God. I believe that faith in God demands that we are true to our own beliefs. So my reflection question to you is, Are there places where your beliefs might differ than traditional beliefs? And I'm trying to give you great permission to affirm your own truths, as Jeremiah and Daniel did. And I know that having the permission to pray honestly was a big deal for me in terms of feeling like I could become a rabbi, even if there were things in the prayer book that I didn't necessarily agree with. So what does faith need to be? It needs to be honest. Look at this next one. This is, by the way, God appeared to them as a statue with faces on every side. 1,000 people might look at the statue. It would appear to be looking at each one of them. So too, when God spoke, each and every person in Israel would say, "Ooh, God's talking to me." Note again that it does not say I'm the Lord your God in plural, Adonai Elohechem. I'm the Lord your God, Ani Adonai Elohecha, in singular. Everyone experiences God in different ways. And so this text, which gives you permission to experience God in your own way, according to your own capacity, the divine word spoke to each and every person according to their own capacity, koach, is asking you, how do I experience God? That really is the ultimate question, that you have the permission to experience God your own way. And I think we often feel like unless we can parrot a particular text and or tradition, we are not having fidelity to tradition. I think this text frees us. I did want to deal with the issue of bad things happening to good people, because bad things happening to good people is a faith buster for many people. And there have been people who said to me, not out of a reflection of their pain, but out of a reflection of their honest reflection, "Rabbi, why is God doing this to me?" And I don't believe in a God who is doing those things to them. I know that some people want to hear me say that. Here's the purpose. I believe that God may be with them, that God may care for them, but I certainly don't believe that God is punishing them. In fact, there's a man who I'm calling right now all of the time. He's going through some cancer treatment, and his question is, "Rabbi, why would God do this to me?" And my answer is, "I don't believe God is doing this to you." And he would say then to me, "Rabbi, why is God doing this to me?" So, it's something that somehow we've internalized. Look at this text. Length of life, in other words, health. Children, whether you have them or not. Sustenance, how well you do economically, depends not on one's merit, but on one's mazel. This isn't a modern rabbi saying, "I don't believe that those things are controlled by God." This is from the Talmud. Consider Rabbah and Rav Chisda. They're both saintly. One prayed for rain, it came. The other prayed for rain, it also came. So by the way, this was written at a time where they also believed that there were miracles connected to the rabbis. But Rav Chisda lived to 92 and Rabbah only to age 40. So in other words, Rabbah died young and Rabbah did nothing wrong. He was a saint. Rav Chisda's house, there were 70, 60 weddings, and Rabbah's house, 60 funerals. Poor Rabbah. The man had terrible, terrible suffering. In Rav Chisda's house, there was bread of the finest flour, even for dogs. It went to waste. In Rabbah's house, barley bread, which is the lowest of the lowest, was served to human beings, and even that was hardly to be had. The Talmud brings us a revolution in terms of the concept in the prophets of punishment to those who do evil and reward to those who do good. It rejects it, not in every case, but it rejects it when it comes to the basics, health, children, and money. And then there's the story of the rickety ladder that it says, if you shoo away the mother from the eggs you are going to take or the fledgling you're going to take, you will live a long life. And the story is the story of the boy who climbs up the ladder and it breaks and he dies. It also says if you honor your parents, you'll live a long life. The addendum to the story is it was the father who asked them to go get the fledglings. So he was honoring his parents. He was chewing away both of the things that say long life. He falls from the ladder and dies. What does it say? The latter was rickety. In other words, sometimes tragedy happens because there are laws of nature. And our job as humans is to try to understand causalities so that we can bring healing and that tragedy doesn't happen, which for me is one of the most powerful truths in terms of theology. I don't believe that God will fix the world. We have to fix the world. And when we look at the injustices that are happening right now, it is not divine punishment. It is a divine call for us to act. So for me, this is a revolution, rejecting causality. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about a faith that says, as you live with ethics, you feel a sense of God. Be holy because I'm holy. What does it mean to say God's holy? As God clothes the naked, you clothe the naked. As God visits the sick, you care for the sick. As God comforts the mourner, you comfort the mourner. As God buries the dead, you bury the dead. God clothed Adam and Eve. God visited Abraham. God comforted Moses. And God buried Moses. There's a sense of, as we do that which we associate with divinity, we feel a deep connection to divinity. That would be where my theology has changed the most in the last 5 years. Really feeling the connection between ethics, goodness, and a sense of God. In the Talmud, there's a sense of, it's not that God can intervene, but that God feels. I actually find that very comforting. I know some don't. God witnesses human suffering and cries. So the deep sense of God who hears. Another piece of my theology. A person enters a synagogue, stands behind a pillar and prays in a whisper. God hears. Can there be a nearer God than this? God's near to humanity as the earth to the mouth. And then this last quote is a little enigmatic, but I wanted to end with it. You're my witnesses, says the Lord, and I am God. Shimon Bar Yochai says, if you're my witnesses, I am the Lord. If you are not my witnesses, as it were, I am not, as it were, the Lord. It is us who is responsible to bring God into this world. Wow. I'm going to give myself applause for having got through all of that. Thank you, thank you. But here's what I really want to do. I kind of wish it were 15 minutes ago, because I want you to have a chance to respond to these texts. Give me some thoughts. Give me some reactions. Robin.
Not fully formed in my mind, but I'll start with that I feel I've inherited, my heritage is my inheritance. And my children inherit it from me, but we have very different understandings, very different experiences. And this gives permission to honor that inheritance and honor that gift with whatever new perspective my generation, their generation brings. So in particular, I have kids who are very scientific and very atheist, but I think that understanding that there's an inroad for them and that they're receiving something that's a gift that is theirs.
Right.
To give it to them to own and in whatever shape or form they can. So it just speaks to me in that way.
Right.
I appreciate
I,
it.
by the way, am really good at preaching that, my kids get to find their own voices around it. That's a harder one to live. I really kind of want them to, embrace the faith that I'm trying to pass on to them. So God bless you. And you're right. And we all need to get there. And it's interesting. And I recognize that, the synagogue that I will visit after I retire is going to be much different than the synagogue that I have helped to build. And the synagogue that Rabbi Teitelbaum would come to was a much different synagogue when I took it over. And what amazed me is how joyful he was in embracing those changes. And I hope that I am as gracious. Other thoughts? Joe. And then Linda.
Well, I think, you sort of said it, that, when you light the candles on Friday night, or when you say a blessing over your kids, God is with you. I mean, to me, the rituals that we are ingrained with is where God comes to you. When you put your hands on your kids and you say the blessings, or you say the blessings over the wine or the challah, that's where God's with you.
Nice. So Joe, you've brought something that wasn't on my study sheet. And that's the beauty of kind of creating time and space to open this up to all of you. When do you feel God? When you're doing ritual, the power of bringing in light, the power of blessing children, and that transmission may be the most godly thing that a human can do. The power to bless another may be where divine presence sits. Write that up, Joe. Linda.
Yeah. In my life, I'm always really aware of things that happen a certain way. And I never know at the time, but I always say to myself, one day I'm going to know why this happened. It was meant to be. I believe in things being meant to be. And I sometimes feel that God has a hand in it. For instance, when my mother passed away, at first I was like, this isn't her time. It shouldn't have happened. Why did it happen right now? She wasn't even sick. But a couple things. First of all, she prayed every day that when she goes, she wants to just go quickly, and she did. And then I thought to myself, I was talking to Mike the other day, she never would have been able to deal with COVID. And if something had happened to her now, how would we have gotten her to New York? That would have, and it was just so much easier and right that it happened when it happened. And I didn't understand it at the time, but I do now.
Thank you, Linda. I, by the way, want to be really careful in terms of how I presented this, moving towards the rabbinic view. That in no way negates some of the beautiful concepts in the Bible. And when you were talking, that concept of God is with me, that I actually know many of you have felt, and it's almost like, I can't say that because people will think, I'm a little wah. But why can't we be open in those stories?
Right.
And Linda, I know you have felt that in a beautiful way. And I've tried to open that door in terms of my own personal theology, that sense of God is with me. God is with me. I see hands up for Ed and Sandra, and then Lori. Go ahead, Ed. Loud, please.
Well, I'm going to go back to something that you said to me a long time ago. We were having discussions in terms of my beliefs about God. And in the discussion today, we saw also, when we referred to various readings, the contradictory attributes of God.
So by the way, for those of you who are having trouble hearing, Ed's talking about the contradictory aspects of God that we viewed in the texts.
Contradictory aspects. God is merciful, but God can be also very grim, very punitive. And you said that the important thing in terms of relationship to God is, at least for me, not to dwell on the contradictory aspects and accept the notion that God ultimately is ineffable. We can't truly understand God.
Good.
What we can do is to try to emulate the attributes that we connect with God. To be merciful, to be kind, to be this, to be that.
Good. So for Ed, I know that some people aren't unable to hear, and you're giving me the hear signal. So one of the things that Ed said is that the ability to take those seeming contradictions, God is compassionate, God is jealous, God is, forgiving, God is punishing. And that is actually leads to the conclusion of God is ineffable. God is is beyond comprehension. But then where Ed is talking about finding that personal faith is in doing that which is godly. So that last piece that we brought up, that for me is such a compelling piece that I think was a deep piece of rabbinic faith. It's that God is the paradigm of ethics and ethical behavior, and that as we do that godliness, who knows where it takes us. And I'm actually going to suggest for some of us, it can take us to a place of connectedness too that could be beautiful. Lori, your hand was up. And then Yochanan.
Thanks, Rabbi. Great class. I wrote down 22 questions to workbook now. And in fact, Torah study was not my favorite thing ever, even through all the years of Camp Ramah. And it wasn't until I started doing Torah study with you that I came to the power and deliciousness of Torah study, because what I learned from the community and from you in Torah study was that we got to turn over the same words over and over and over and came to different understandings of God, of ourselves, of godliness, even in the same phrase over weeks. And I find that beautiful. And where I'm going with that is understanding that our understanding of God can change, our embodiment of God can change, our understanding of the traits of godliness can change. And where my question is if we say that God's self is changing, then doesn't that lead to the idea that God must have a beginning? Because when you change from a start point. And we don't need to answer that now, but
Sure.
And the last thing I want to say is I think it's from Psalms that I think overrides my whole 22 questions here, which is, I think it's a quote, be still and know that I am God.
Nice.
Be still and know that I am God, right? Something like that. And then everything else falls under that. Be still and know I am with you. So,
Right.
yeah.
So the still small voice and the be still. By the way, I wonder if we can say for God that there is no beginning and no end. So therefore you evolve from a place of no. But I think you can only do that if you're God. Yochanan, we're going to give you the last comment.
Well, so many facets have come out in the study and in everyone's comments, and I think all of us can relate to them as primary at different times. But what is coming to my mind right now is our home rituals, our Jewish home rituals, that no matter what anyone in the family believes or practices, we come together as much as possible on Friday night, and we light candles, and we do Kiddush, and we have a meal together. And there is something about that brings the presence of God into all of our awareness, that we feel this energy, this connectedness, this this timelessness that inspires all of us in different ways, whether it be the prophetic message about the world or just that message of Einstein of awe, to be in just amazing awe and pursue questions. There's something, so I'm bringing it back to that practicality of Jewish ritual that keeps getting us in touch with something nameless, something hard to describe, that is just awesome and beautiful. And
Beautiful.
So to me, that's the essence, maybe for many of us, of what belief is not relevant. It's the experience. You know, like they say, you ask someone if they believe in God, and they go, I don't know. But you say, oh, when do you experience the divine? And then they can tell you.
Nice. Nice. By the way, it's very clear that to this study sheet, I want to add experiencing God through ritual. And it's I think a really beautiful thing to hear so many of you express that. By the way, if any of you have other ideas and thoughts you want to share with me as you reflect on this, as usual, I threw a ton at you tonight. Thank you for blessing me with your thoughts about it. And what a joy for me to be able to study this. Just in terms of stuff, Wednesday night, 8 o'clock is Tisha B'Av, very powerful community experience. Next week is that community trip to Israel. We're going to send out a trailer. The guy who we're working with is extraordinary, and he's made 5 documentary films about people who reflect the synthesis of complexity when it comes to Israeli issues and identity. So we're going to meet an Ethiopian woman who respects tradition but is a first-generation Israeli and is strong and independent, and who experiences racial issues as we are experiencing here. And we're going to watch her do a tea ceremony with her grandfather. So then after we watch that documentary, the tour guide is going to give us some history and take us to places. Then we're going to have a chance to interact with people from the film. And then we'll kind of have a chance to interact with each other and other people from Kolomet who we're going on the trip with. So it's going to be extraordinary, cool, everybody. Come. So that'll be next week. And then the week after that, I am going to teach on Wednesday, the 12th. What do we believe about afterlife? I kind of bit off some big topics here. But it's been fun to prepare for it. So I hope everyone's well. I wish everyone well. Take a minute and unmute so we can greet each other. And I'll just wish every single one of you a good week and a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. This is amazing.
You're welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Yasher Koach.
Thank you.
Rabbi, do you know if the thing tomorrow night is going to be recorded, because I can't make it on Tolerance?
I'm not sure. Pop Rebecca a note.
Okay. All right.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I came in a little late. Are you, maybe I missed that, will you share the text?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll have
Or
Rebecca,
should I email you
send it
to?
out to everybody.
Okay.
And yes, there will be a link to the Israel trip. We'll send it out again. We're gonna push it hard this week.
My eyes and making me think. Jackie. Okay.
Good. So we'll see you all. We'll see you all in Jerusalem.
All right. Thanks.
Next year in Jerusalem.
Right.
What are you doing? Oh, I'm not leaving yet. I'm going to talk to Yochanan.
Okay. Good to see you, Grace.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Take care, Yochanan.
Thank you, Rabbi. Another good night of learning and being together.
Thank you, Josie. It's good to see you. Thanks for your note.
Thank you for your notes. I'm very excited about the Israel trip.
It's going to be fun. We're not going to be able to ride our camel together, but
And Marcia Chaikin, is Marcia here now?
she's not.
She sent me an email. She goes, let's sit in the front so we can see and hear everything.
That's so funny. That's great.
Like we're really going, We are
Like
going.
we're going.
We are going.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Good
You're
night,
welcome.
everybody.
Good
See you
night.
next time.
Thanks, Yochanan. Good night.
Rabbi, is there going to be a difference between is it going to be the kids are going to be with us at the same time, or do they have
No, the kids are going to do their own thing.
Okay.
All kid appropriate.
Okay. Because I signed up my granddaughter, but I also signed us up.
Excellent. Even better. Take care,
Good to see you, Esther. Good to see you, Rabbi.
See us. Good to see you too. Excellent.
Barry's feeling a little better, Esther, right?
Oh, he is much better.
Yay.
Much. Thankfully. I'm so happy.
Yeah.
That's great. Me too.
Good. It's good.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Take care.
Good night.
Yeah.
Good night. Good night.
Bye.